Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not
subscribe?
So today new set means new deck, and this time I actually have been tinkering around with this deck for a few weeks, and it was quite fun to actually work it out. And since I know now what's the super rares and what's the ultra rares and whatever, I was prepared for the worst, and I'm pleasantly surprised because you can play this deck fairly budgety, and you could even cut if you want to try it out at the start if you like this kind of deck. I'll go over it right now. There's some cards that you can be substituting or not be playing at all. And that is, in theory, you could cut one Ariane. If you don't want this card, you could cut it. You can technically cut one of them and then special summon it with this card. If you like drew one of them on your pack, but you didn't get 3 of this, then you could do it like this and swap the ratios out a bit if you feel like it. So technically, like 2 of Arianna is fine and 1 of Ariane works then, and so on and so on. But this would be like the optimal setup for a budget version, I'd say. Technically, 3 of them is fine in any kind of combination. Well, not 3 of just them. You want to at least be running 2 of Arianna, I'd say. You could get away with just running 1 field spell. 2, in my opinion, is kind of the sweet spot because you do want this card up as much as possible because this is your resource gain and this is quite nice. In the end, you don't need to run it at 2. There's different ways, especially since I decided to include a Labrynth Set-Up, which I know is a bit strange. Most people wouldn't play it, but in a budget deck, and I always try to make the deck like kind of pure, kind of focus on their playstyle. Labrynth Set-Up can be nice, but this would also be a card you can cut if you want to be going for other kind of shenanigans. But 1 field spell you would get away with, especially if you run Set-Up, because you actually can target Labrynth spell traps that are banished on your graveyard. So if your deck if your opponent even banishes the card, you can still get it back. So technically 1 is fine, especially with Setup. So if you want to cut down on one of these cards, then cut down on 1 Labrynth, and that should also be fine. Other than that, there's not much else you could be cutting down. I already cut down most of the stuff that you usually would be running at 3. So let's talk about the ratios of the cards that people would want to see in this deck first. Obviously, Welcome Labrynth is usually a 3-off because this card is just very, 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 very good. But you have very many ways of searching this card, so you do get away with trying to keep it as cheap as possible, and this is what I'm trying to do. So obviously, this card at 2 still works. It still sets itself. You have quite a lot of ways of getting into it, and even if you don't get it the first turn, you will have a Fiend monster in hand that does something, and then we do play some other stuff to possibly get into this card. So it's not terrible to run it at 2. You would definitely get away with it. And another one that I decided to cut down to 2. Some people play it at 3, some people play it at 1, some people play it at 2. I decided to go for a 1 and fill it up, the deck up with the Archfiend, which obviously nobody plays because this deck, this card isn't really amazing. It can be quite good in the later stages to push for game, and the effect isn't terrible if you decide to run Farewelcome Labrynth, which this card is quite nice. I will talk about it in a minute or 2. But yeah, obviously if you don't want to run Archfiend and you have 2 at least lovely Labrynths, then you can run this card at 2 instead, because that makes the deck a tiny bit better than it already is. We decide for the ratios of the small ones. 1 Cooclock, because well, the card is nice and it's very, very fun actually going second, because you can activate Torrential Tribute during your turn and can clear your opponent's board. That's something that is funny and did come up 1 time at least. Obviously, if you only run it at 1, then you have a bit of an issue with it. But these cards are very searchable, and you can get this card back once it's in rotation. You can send it to the graveyard. I don't run the trap that actually sends them to the graveyard. I run a different one that does, but later on that one. So 1 I feel like was kind of the sweet spot, because you do not want to max out with them because they don't do much in your hand. And since this is mainly a trap deck that gains you advantage out of activating traps, obviously you want to be activating as many traps as possible, or at least have the opportunity to activate as many traps as possible. Labrynth, Stovie, Torbie, you know, the level 2 one, is also, you can play it at 3, you can play it at 2 if you have better cards. If you want to splash in all of your hand traps, Maxi, Ash Blossoms, Infinite Impermanences, then you could cut these 2 to 2, but I like them at 3 because it helps me search in the cards I really want, especially since I run this card at 2. So maxing out on those ones, the ones that search, even though you lose advantage by discarding a card from your hand, which is a bit problematic. Technically, sometimes with Lost Wind you can make up for this. There's certain other things that works. For example, if you discard Welcome Labrynth, then you can set this card back, but I think you can't activate it the same turn that you set it back. It's a bit difficult, but you know how it is. So these two cards kind of recycle themselves when you activate, when one of your opponent's monsters leaves the field by one of your normal trap cards. One of them, this adds itself to the hand, this special summons itself, so this is another 2000 defense block wall, which can be quite nice. And the fact that this card special summons itself back comes in handy for cards like Ballista Squad, which obviously usually you wouldn't put in here, but since this can tribute one monster in the target one card your opponent controls and destroy it, is good against annoying floodgatey stuff that stops you from playing other crazy shenanigans spell trap wise that your opponent has, because you don't run that much spell trap removal. And also it's another normal trap card that is not once per turn, and also technically works with the whole setup, because you can't easily tribute monsters because they do all come back. Your small monsters don't do all that much anyway. So I felt like this for triggering the effects again of the cards is quite nice. Then obviously we run the one Ariane. It's technically a card that can be somewhat fun for going into rank 4s, because it doesn't lock you after you use the effect. You still lose a card, like you don't gain advantage, but you don't lose advantage. Technically you gain advantage if you summon out the Labrynth Servant, so this card does actually something if you play it in conjunction. So yeah, I like it. It's not amazing, but I like it. This one is the good one, the classic one, obviously super rare, the Searcher. We have tradition with this in Yu-Gi-Oh! And in Master Duel specifically. This searches you one Labrynth card from your deck to hand, not just monster or spell trap or whatever, a card, so that can be quite nice. We run one Archfiend, already talked about this. It's a replacement, you don't have to run it, you could cut it if you like, but I kind of like the fact that you'll be able to summon this out during your opponent's turn, and also you can set one normal trap from your deck that can only be activated when an attack is declared. So technically, if I'm not mistaken, you could be running a Mirror Force in here and just annoy your opponent with this a little bit. Jelly Cannon comes to mind if you want to keep it a bit cheaper. I think even Wall of Disruption should work, so technically this can come up with lots of shenanigans, but the cards that you can run is Welcome Labrynth. Oof, hard one. And this card is kind of important for your field spell as well in the grind game, so I'll be talking about this once I reach the field spell. We run one of this card, very good in generating advantage, very easy to summon out of the deck, very easy to summon from the graveyard. If your opponent banishes it, that's the only problem that comes into mind. So technically you want to be running 2 of this and only 1 of this, but obviously keeping it cheap and blah blah blah. Try it out like this. If you want to go all in on the deck, then get 1 or 2 more copies of this card. Pot of Extravagance, very good in this deck, especially since Pot of well, the Pot of where you search stuff, I always forget the name, is limited to 1, then this card in general is the better option, I feel like, because the +2 in trap decks always feels quite nice. You don't have much that actually draws your cards during your turn. Technically these cards can, but mainly you'll be using it during your opponent's turn because you already have used their effects while summoning them. Sometimes it clashes a bit if you normal summon them, obviously, but if you special summon them with the trap, then you can only draw a card the next turn again, technically opportunity wise, because you can't activate each effect once per turn, but you can only activate 1 of the effects once per turn. So yeah, sometimes that might clash with the draw of Pot of Extravagance, but a +1 is, it just is a bit too good at the moment, or in general. Name one time when that was ever bad. Pot of Greed is banned for a reason. Labrynth could play that 1. This card is amazing. You have this whole setup with, if you activate a Labrynth trap card, then you can destroy 1 card on the field, which is quite nice. Usually it will be Welcome Labrynth, like you don't need this card for it, but you can, and it can be quite nice to clear up after your opponent. And if you activate a non-Labrynth normal trap, then you can special summon 1 fiend monster from your hand or from your graveyard, which is quite nice, because even if level 8 gets stuck in your hand, you can still use it, because this card only summons from deck. And yeah, once this card hits the graveyard, if your opponent can't banish it, then you can still get it back with your field spell. And obviously, since this card is so strong, you want to run it at 2. 3 can be bricky because you don't want to draw multiples, and you can easily search this card, but 1 might not be enough. If you can't really recycle it, then you're a bit screwed. 1 Labrynth Set-Up. This card is, it's okay. If you want to run any other card for it, feel absolutely free. It's not done all that much. There is certain situations where this card can come in handy, because you can recycle spell trap cards like your field spell. If your opponent actually goes through your field spell once per turn, then you it's kind of nice having a card that gets them back. And that did come up 1 time in the grind game. I don't know if I won the game in the end, but it did actually help me stay in the grind game with my field spell. And I can then set non-Labrynth normal traps at, and you can't set the field spell back, but that's usually fine because I have so many ways to still search it with different names from your deck, so you can actually search one of your cards out. And I quite like the whole fact that you can technically it's a bit like a weaker Sky Striker. You can search the answer to certain problematic bits from your opponent's field and yeah, get them back onto your side of the field, so like you deal with them with your trap cards. We run Double Ring of Destruction, gets rid of your opponent's monsters so they leave the field, so that does work for your deck, and the burn effect helps you actually closing out the game. Watch out though, because you might burn yourself to death at one point, and since this card has a lot new restrictions, well, not new, but you know, the card was a lot better back in the days, you have to watch out. More than 2 is probably bad. You could cut this card down to 1 or cut it up all if you want to, but I feel like the destruction plus burn effect can be quite nice, especially in decks that kind of lack the power to actually get through your opponent. Torrential Tribute, super nice because you technically can even activate it going second with the Cooclock, but yeah, also going first is not bad, because a lot of the time, even if you have your monsters, you can easily summon them back with your field spell. And also a nice card thing with this is you want to slow down the game pace, because if you get your opponent to grind game, then this deck's really nice, and that's where then these kind of when an attack is declared kind of traps shine a bit more than they usually do, because usually you get either you stop your opponent's place and then they won't attack anyway, which doesn't really overly matter because the card also works on your attack, so that's quite nice. But sometimes then you get to a game state where attacks do matter a bit more, and then these kind of cards start mattering more and actually gain you a lot more advantage than they usually would, which is also not too bad. Plus you can just Torrential Tribute your opponent's board and then afterwards use Welcome Labrynth to summon your monsters out, so you don't really lose too much with it. Also you can summon them back after you've destroyed some of them, so that is also not too bad. Evac Device, an easy cheap card to get rid of cards on your opponent's field and trigger your effects. One card that I decided to put in Fiend Griefing is, first of all, there will be decks that do stuff with cards in the graveyard, and this might help it a tiny bit. Also, since you can search this card with the effect of Farewelcome Labrynth, for example, it's not too bad at 1. Also, it sends 1 Fiend monster from your deck to the graveyard, so you could send one of the ones that add itself back, or you could even send the big one to revive it with the field spell if you don't have access to it, so that's a nice one. And also, well, it's a bit worse than another card you could be playing that's also in the set, Archfiend's Ghastly Glitch. This card is basically made for this deck. It's very important that you would be running it if you have access to it, so you can replace certain cards like Ring of Destruction, like Fiend Griefing, like Compulsory Evacuation Device, like Ballista Squad with triple of this card, and you'll be absolutely fine. But since this is super rare, I've tried to find a different way of binning some Fiend monsters. Lost Wind, good because you can set it back from your graveyard. Titanocider also works, but it's a super rare. Because you sometimes discard with this, then you at least don't lose too much value, plus the whole negating effects if you don't play triple Infinite Impermanence can also be nice. Ballista Squad, already talked about this one. It's better than it sounds like. It's not amazing, but it's better than it sounds like. Also, if you want to Torrential Tribute and then disrupt your opponent's place with continuous spell cards or field spells, whatever, and you know you're going to Torrential your board anyway, then this card doesn't hurt you too much either. Dogmatika Punishment, very nice card. Could run it at 3, but it's one of these things again, in these specific decks, you kind of don't want to draw into doubles of cards that can only be activated once per turn, because you want to utilize as many cards as possible. It's like with combo decks why the engines work so good, like the adventure stuff and whatnot, because they're all one card kind of thing. So if you have them in hand, you can do multiple things, and you can utilize everything in your hand. But if you draw into cards like this, where you can only activate 1, but you draw into 3, then you have a very, very, very dead hand. And that is not what you want, especially since we do not run Entis, because this card is an ultra rare. We don't gain the full value out of it. So I felt like running this card at 2 was fine, but obviously you could bump it up to 3. Another card we run for this is the Machine Skull Wagon, because you can banish it from the graveyard and pop 1 spell trap on the field, which is quite nice, but 1700 attack might not be enough for punishment a lot of the time. Welcome Labrynth, already talked about this card. It's amazing. This card quite nice because the effect that you can set 1 non-Labrynth normal trap from your hand or deck is very important. Very nice. You can do so much with this. You can do, like, even if you obviously you want to use this during your opponent's battle phase, so then you can set up a card that you use during your turn then, which is quite nice because your opponent might be out of resources to get rid of it then. Also, this card works when a monster declares an attack while you control a field monster. That means you can negate your own attack also, and also then still search a card and pop a card, and also do all of these kind of things. So that's quite nice. Plus it triggers the field spell, then you can destroy another card. So this works in the grind game quite a lot with the field spell. You don't have to run it, but I found it works better than it should. Solemn Judgment to protect you from Lightning Storm and Swords. And the extra deck is basically here for Dogmatika Punishment, like the Blue Eyes, for example. Then we have some rank 4 stuff, because you technically can go into rank 4s with this. Evilswarm Nightmare is a nice thing because it's a Fiend monster, so like even the lock that you get from Welcome Labrynth is not too bad, because you can still special summon Fiend monsters, so that's quite nice. Same for Rhapsody. Then you have some other rank 4 stuff if you're not locked, some extra deck stuff if you can't get rid of certain things. Puzzlomino, Geonature Transfer, so can be quite nice if your opponent doesn't play around it, which most people wouldn't because nobody plays this card. Can help you get rid of cards that cannot be destroyed and stuff. Then we have Power Code Talker, just because it's cheap. You can obviously play good cards, play Nightmare Unicorn, play Access Code Talker for these cards. They're just in here because, yeah, you want to fill up your extra deck with stuff. Baguska comes to mind that you can also easily play, and you can play Linkuriboh. You would be playing this card if you played a card that a lot of people would be playing, I think, is Absolute King Backjack, because this card is very nice in a trap deck, and especially in this deck it does quite a lot of things, and you want to have it in the graveyard. You can discard it with these then, and it has a very, very nice synergy, but sadly it's a super rare, so I did not include it. But that would be a nice card to combo off of with Linkuriboh as well, because then you get battle protection at least a tiny bit. You get this card into the graveyard, you can use the graveyard effect, and that generates you some advantage, and so on and so on. There's quite a lot you can do. Trap cards that I wanted to mention. Trap Trick obviously can be very nice in the specific deck. Ice Dragon's Prison, a card that's very good in any trap deck, especially at the moment. This card is amazing. If you have it, I would definitely run it out 1 or 2. A Hate Buster, a card that's in the new set, if I'm not mistaken. I know it's in here because of this, and I know it's a terrible card, but I wanted to mention it because it's quite funny when a Fiend monster you control is targeted for an attack. The opponent's attacking monster and that monster both are being destroyed, and then you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to the original attack of the opponent's destroyed monster. So this is actually a game finishing kind of thing, and technically you can set this card with stuff like the Labyrinth, and then your opponent knows about it, but it can stop them from actually attacking. Another card to mention, Lord of the Heavenly Prison in a trap deck is never too terrible. Could decide running it if you have it, but you have to work around certain specific problems. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a good day.